Hey guys, what's up? It's Lizzy Jane, and we're back with another week of the XO podcast. We have a very special guest joining us this week that is a little bit away from the electronic dance music sphere. He is a renowned, highly accredited composer that goes by the name of Ego Plum. He's known as the cartoon composer. His recent credits include scoring for the entirety of Netflix's new Cuphead show that has just been renewed for another 2 seasons. It's doing phenomenally well. He has credits on Nickelodeon's Making Fiends. He's been part of the Spongebob universe for give or take the past 5 to 10 years, writing for franchises like Spongebob Squarepants, Patrick Starr Show, and being a part of the Paramount Original Kamp Koral. His stories are absolutely incredible. There's so much that we can take away from this discussion, and especially to all the producers out there, apply it to the future of what you could potentially see yourself doing in the next 10 to 20 years. I personally learned so much. It was an absolute honor to have Ego on, and I really hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Don't forget that you get these episodes ad free, exclusive bonus content only on my Patreon at www.patreon.com/this is Lizzy Jane. I also do one-on-one lessons. You get sample packs, vocal packs, lots of cool stuff over there. Go and check it out. Make sure to email, comment, DM me if you have any questions, and I'll make sure to get back to you. Also, without further ado, this episode was brought to you by Vitaplur. Make sure to check out them in the description of the link below. Super pumped to have you go on. I hope you guys really enjoy this conversation. And don't forget, next week we start the rollout of the podcast that I just did from Miami Music Week, Ricky Remedy Quarter, and so much more. This is Lizzy Jane, and you're tuning into this week's episode of the Lizzy Jane podcast. The show today was brought to you by Vitaplur E-Boost Gum. With no pill to take or powders to mix, Vitaplur E-Boost Gum is a first-of-its-kind energy rave supplement that provides magnesium, electrolytes, and antioxidants while you chew. Vitaplur is the perfect complement to my active lifestyle, whether it's at the festival, on the road touring, or hitting the gym. Chew Vitaplur and dance with confidence. Use code LizzyJane for 10% off any order. All right, Ego, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are someone who recently your latest works have been scoring for the new Cuphead show on Netflix, which has been already renewed for another 2 seasons, which is super, you know, it's awesome because you don't see that happen too much nowadays, especially in the world of animation.
I know I'm very lucky, and I'm just so glad that the show's been so well received. We took a big chance making this kind of show, this kind of a throwback thing, and people seem to love it. It's really, really neat. I'm just so happy.
Oh, absolutely. And I've listened to a few podcasts that you've done before, and you not only are you, known for your works on SpongeBob, and you've worked with Disney Channel, and you've worked with HBO Max, and it's just kind of like you have this sound of being the composer of cartoons. And you've just wiggled your unique style and implemented it into these bodies of work that have been known through the last few decades, which is amazing. And Cuphead is something that is so much a risk and a chance of getting something like that to succeed and revamping something from simply a video game. I know my boyfriend and I have played Cuphead a few times. It's pretty hard. I'll put it out there. It's a pretty hard game, but to hear your adaptation from the original score is just really awesome. And I would love to know how you really got involved with Cuphead to begin with. Just taking on that score and going to Netflix and pitching yourself to be a part of the show.
I was very lucky in that I had a relationship with the showrunner, Dave Wasson, the guy that made Cuphead Show. We met, was that like 15 years ago when I worked at Nickelodeon on my first series called Making Fiends.
Yes.
Now, this was like a short-lived, really weird, quirky show, kind of like a goth strange little show that I wish it could have lasted longer, but it didn't, unfortunately. And we became friends at that point, kind of maintained a social relationship. And that's important. Obviously, a lot of what we do is based on the relationships that we build with other artists. So when he got the job as the director and showrunner for Cuphead, he said, "Hey, I can't promise anything, but it'd be great to have you do like some sort of an informal audition." So I have these lyrics for a song for the devil to sing, first
Yeah.
episode, the devil song. And he gave me the words and he just sort of gave me some guidance of what he thought it should be. And I just went to town. I just started writing and writing. This was like 3 years ago at this point. And
Okay.
I, you know, came up with a few melodies and had some ideas. And ultimately, you just have to trust your instinct. Like, you can't like give them five different things or even three. It's like, I know this is right. It feels right. I'm going to turn it in and hope for the best. And obviously, like he liked it, but then it has to go through the ranks of Netflix and the producers and everybody up and down. And I got the job based on that one song alone.
That's
And what you hear on the first episode is no different than my demo. I added a few more horns and a few different things, but that's the song that got me the gig.
Oh, that's and sometimes it's like it's that single off the album, it's the single off the EP, it's the hit song in the episode, in the series that's going to drive where the rest of the score comes from. And
But,
and I think that is just, it's so exciting, and to me, like, my mind, it kind of goes a thousand different ways at one time, but I think of the things that you say as far as dealing with executives and dealing with this and dealing with that, but you had to commit to this one thing that everybody was either going to love or absolutely drag down and hate it. and
right.
and you know
We have to take those kind of risks, like I think one of the dangers of being a composer trying to make it in the business is you want to try to please everybody and you want to do something that everyone's going to like. But what happens as a result of that is you make something that doesn't mean anything to anyone, really, because you ultimately have to have your own voice. And it's riskier and it's scarier because you might not get all the jobs you want. You might be, you might miss a bunch of these jobs. But if you stay true to who you are as an artist and that voice, whatever that may be, uh, ultimately you're going to find some success in that, or at least you're going to pair up with the people that appreciate that and want you for that. They don't want you to do something else, but they want you to sound like you.
Yes. Oh, 100%. And it's being around those like minded individuals that are oftentimes, when you first meet them, they're a few levels above you. And you
Yeah,
say, okay, this is how I have to push myself to be around these people where I know this is my in. And I mean, going back towards what you said, the first time that you worked with Nickelodeon was with For My Fiends. And that was when I was a child. So I remember watching Nick, watching all of that stuff and seeing that show on the rotation, because I remember it would be Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. And Nick was always just known for those little quirky shows, sometimes those marketable ones that hit the wide range of demographic, viewers. But I was always someone who was maybe watching those little edgier, niche
yeah,
shows.
absolutely.
And it's you've always done stuff that has been on that niche, pushing the edge, pushing the pocket shows. And I was listening to another one of the podcasts that you were doing, and you had told me that you met the creator of this show when you were still in a punk rock band.
That is totally true. You're talking, yeah, the Amy Winfrey who made Making Fiends. I had like a day job all my 20s. I was working at UCLA, basically a desk job at a cubicle.
Mhm.
And the good thing about being on that campus is that there was a film department and a music department there.
They have
So
a wonderful department there,
yeah,
UCLA.
absolutely. I didn't have the luxury of being a student, but I had the luxury of being in that physical space, which kind of is the same thing in some ways.
Mhm.
Because during lunch, I'd go hang out at the music department. I'd go, meet people at the film department, and they had a bulletin board back there. Pre-internet. I mean, it was the birth of the internet, so people weren't like really advertising themselves online, but physical billboards where I would put little ads that say, "Hey, anyone looking for a composer?" And so I would try to find gigs that way. And I met a few like student filmmakers. Then I would go to the screenings there. Every month they'd have like a student film festival or whatever. And that's where I saw Amy Winfrey's first short film that she made, a cute little thing called Bad Plant. It was about a plant that like eats its owner. It was just odd and
Oh,
weird.
that's great.
Out of like the 15 things I saw, that stayed with me because it was just like, what is this? Who made this? Like, whose demented mind is making these weird little shorts? And I've told the story before, but it's always exciting for me to relive this idea of like me about to walk out of this thing, but having this idea like, no, I got to go back and find whoever made this movie and give them a CD at the time, my first CD. So I turned around and I just asked them like, does anyone know who Amy Winfrey is? I found it in the program. And they said, oh, it's the woman's over there just talking to that group. So I kind of like politely went over there and excuse me. And I gave her a CD and left and forgot about it. Like I didn't think about it again until 5 or 6 years later.
Wow.
She gave me a call, right? And she said, hey, I've had your CD for a long time. I got a series at Nickelodeon. It'd be great to have your music involved. Are you still active? And I'm like, yeah, I'm actually having a record release party for my band next week. You should come. So she saw that I was actually still doing things. I was performing in bands, which made what I'm doing, it made it like appealing and attractive that I'm still, it wasn't like a one-off idea, but I'm an active musician trying to make things happen. So she was at my show, and I think her seeing me perform like really cemented the idea, like, yeah, this guy should be a part of my production. And it's on that show where I met Dave Wasson, who now, 15 years later,
Oh my God.
calls me to be Cuphead. I mean, that decision to turn around with that CD and hand it to Amy, like really changed the course of my life. But the thing is, like for every artist out there, like you have to do that over and over. It's like that little thing you plant everywhere you go, everywhere you meet. There's always like, you never know who you're going to talk to. So it pays to be kind and courteous and to, put yourself out there, make sure people know what you're doing, and it'll one day somehow come back. You never know how or why, but it will. It's insane.
Absolutely. And I think it's so much of, covering what you said about you never know what room you're going to be in, how you're going to meet. And now in this age where, I'm currently in my 20s, I'm throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks and seeing what directions I can take to just continue to make music and be able to, whether I'm working a few other jobs to make that financial income, to keep trying to make music and meet those people. It's just choosing to take the opportunity every time. And now we have the internet. So there's that pro and con to it where it's made it a hell of a lot easier to reach a ton more people opposed to being at these label release parties, being at those showings, and especially being in a city like Los Angeles where, where everything's happening, regardless of if you're working for the company or not, or you're just in the room where you have that personal one-on-one connection. Because I do feel like there's something so special about that we have kind of lost in the development age of the internet. But you also, now I can put a score of something on YouTube, and who's going to see it on YouTube? Who's going to see it on this filmmaker site? Or I could send it to somebody in Japan. I could send it to somebody in Europe and see what comes from that. So it's so interesting how so much has changed, but so little has changed. But overall, it's like you don't ever want to burn bridges. You don't ever just don't be a shitty person. And it's like that those moments, that opportunity that you took, developed into the next 15 years of your career.
Correct. Yeah, that is wild. It kind of blows my mind every time I think about it.
So crazy.
A little bit because it's like, wow, what would have happened if I walked another way that day? But you really can't live like that because I think ultimately we are constantly creating opportunities and meeting people, and we're if it wasn't that, I would have been on some other show today maybe, and it would have been still great, hopefully. But
Yeah.
again, you could sort of cross the street at the wrong time and get hit by a car too. So
Oh,
who knows?
no, absolutely. I mean, you can't live your life thinking about the what ifs, but
Yeah,
I think when those moments of opportunity come, you just have to be ready to take them and ready to be like, okay, this may not be great, but I think it's a level of equality between consistency and effort and just continuing to move forward. And eventually, it's like when you put in 99% of the work, when that 1% of luck comes in when you're in the room with the right person, it all happens and it all falls in line. And I think so much of us of us being in our 20s is just continuing to have that imposter syndrome where you're like, okay, is this happening? But also, all right, just keep going, just keep pushing because one day it will be worth it. One day, that person will be in that room. And have you always had it in your mind that you wanted to compose for animated series, or did you come from, I know you did the live music, you did the band, did you come from that side of musical inspiration that brought you to cartoon scoring?
The stuff I was inspired by early on was really quirky, odd music, and a lot of it was coming from the cartoons I was watching. Like the Looney Tunes that I grew up with, and a lot of people grew up with, had this wonderful music by Warner Brothers musical director Carl Stalling, who would take like the music of the time from the 30s or 40s and classical music and then do these really fun things with it where he would essentially was inventing the remix because he would take, let's say, like a popular song of the era and then like play it really fast with an orchestra or really slow and or just make it go into a weird like samba thing and then back out again, and then deconstruct it and rebuild it. So he was like turning music into rubber essentially and remixing it in real time with human beings in an orchestra. So I would listen to these scores just by themselves. Like if you hear like a cartoon score without the context, it becomes like the most experimental, strange music you've ever heard.
Absolutely.
And I would like do my homework listening to this stuff. And at the same time, you know, I I was into like punk rock and new wave, and there was certain bands that were doing really quirky stuff at that time in the early '80s, the post-punk era. I guess you'd call it like new wave post-punk, but bands like Devo and Oingo Boingo were like almost like cartoon bands in a lot of ways, right? And these guys from these bands ended up being composers. The guy from Devo, his name was Mark Mothersbaugh, and he ended up doing the music for Rugrats
Oh, wow.
and, and for Pee Wee's Playhouse. And today he's like really big composer who did like Thor Ragnarok and a bunch of stuff. Now the
Yeah, that's about as big as you can get.
and the band Oingo Boingo, which is a really weird band, of course, that was Danny Elfman's band.
Yep.
He ultimately became one of the biggest living composers on the planet too. But these guys were wired to do really weird stuff. Like they were just thinking very differently. When I heard that as a young guy, I heard that music, like let's say in Pee Wee's Playhouse, for example, it had Mark Mothersbaugh and Danny Elfman doing music for that show. And I was like, wow, this is like the weirdest, strangest shit I've heard, and it's more interesting and more compelling than the stuff on MTV or the radio. Like incidental background music is sounds infinitely more subversive and strange and compelling than anything I'm hearing anywhere else. So I'm like, I could do that. I want to infiltrate the minds of children through cartoons and put like stuff that has inspired me in there that like that could blow their minds too, if possible. Like expose them to my influences. Like if a kid likes something I'm doing on a show, and there's like musical references to some weird, obscure, post punk band or like a Raymond Scott from the '30s or Black Flag punk rock stuff. Like then I've sort of done my job. Like I've exposed people to like amazing, rich music history that matters to me, and I'm helping sort of pass the legacy of these artists that mean the world to me to another generation of people. You
Oh,
know,
100%. And I feel like that's very rarely done nowadays on like a large scale. But I remember as a child, a different alley, but playing Guitar Hero. That's how I got into rock music. That's
absolutely.
purely how I was exposed to, you know, Aerosmith, Journey, like all these guys where when I started writing music as a child, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make classic rock because I was exposed to that at 9, 10 years old, playing a video game with a fake guitar. And it's just Danny Elfman is someone that I think across all boards is a huge inspirational factor to any musician if they're on that little edgy side and they've taken the dive in, and he is someone that has just broken all boundaries of what is possible. And I think of him and I think of Hans Zimmer and I think of some of the more contemporary composers now, and I love watching movies without the sound on if I'm writing music. And then you find these kind of weird things of scores that you really love, or I'll go on Spotify, listen to somebody like you, I'll listen to somebody like Danny. And it's just this weird experimental, almost sometimes like electronic music.
Yeah, yeah,
And from where we are on this side of the age, where we're doing these at the raves and we're doing this here and there, when I listen to, scores like Cuphead, and then I listen to some of these deeper, darker experimental artists, like
yeah,
there's not much of a difference. It's this weird boundary pushing thing where yours is more, infiltrated by organic instruments, but it still has this energy to it that's just like pushing, like I talk to my students sometimes, and it's like pushing a gorilla forward. You're like pushing the stamina throughout the score. And I just think that taking from inspirations and like passing it to the next generation is what will continue to break the boundaries of sound as far as scoring and just releasing music in general. Because going from like marketable music
yeah.
to, I would say, your type of scoring is a totally different animal to approach and master. And people like you and people like Danny, have you guys just have such this niche sound that you have created these like cult followings of your music, which is super awesome. I know it sounds kind of like cult. You're like, oh no, but it's like that's what you want as an artist.
Let me talk about what you said earlier about when you hear the score and that pushing. What did you call it? The gorilla.
Like the gorilla. That's what I always say. Like if I'm talking about like percussion work or hi-hats, or like where you have like your 808s or your subs or something sitting in the 0 to like 100 hertz frequency, that like
Right.
momentum of pushing that forward is like what is driving everything in the whole entire spectrum of sound.
That comes from, at least for me as a composer, um, and it comes from a couple of places. And it's not from classical music. It's not from other scores. When I grew up with punk rock. Like this music means a lot to me, right? Being at a punk rock show and watching an audience, like when you see the circle pit happening,
Circle pit, the mosh pits, the circle pits. Yeah.
it takes all your energy to not want to dive in there. Like I was at a show recently. It's like I don't want to hurt myself, but I just want to smash my face into the ground right here because this is fucking amazing. Now, punk rock does it, and EDM does it as well. When you see a certain band performing, you see, or you know, when you see like an artist, even just a simple DJ, and you see the way the audience is responding, you realize how real what that person is doing on that stage is. Like, I cannot take away anything from someone that's on a laptop if they have that kind of command of an audience. That is more fucking real than anything out there. Like, Hans Zimmer doesn't make me want to move like that. But Daft Punk or Justice will do that to me because it's that amazing. And I mentioned those bands because they're like Justice. I think you're aware who Justice is, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
They have such a strong melodic sense, and it's like I love how it's almost like Baroque. It's like the melodies are so like catchy and great. Same with Daft Punk. Like they just know how to write strong melodies, and I love that about them. So that kind of music, that kind of dance music or punk rock equally have these things that pull you to move. It's like today when I was driving, I was listening to one of your tracks, and I was like, I see what's going on here. I was like, you are in the business of controlling human bodies.
Yes.
Like, you felt the way your track was building, and then it stops, and then it starts. It's like you are puppeteering a human being to like get ready for this drop, and then boom, and then just fucking going, and then you back down, and then back up again. It's like, okay, you're
It's the
scoring the
dynamic range.
right.
It's
You're essentially scoring the human body, and the way it's moving.
I
And
love that.
that's what good EDM does to me. I'm not super versed in a lot of artists, like I said, but as far as like electronic music, like go back, like Kraftwerk is one of the most important bands. To me. Right, like that's where I learned that it's okay for people just to stand there and not move because if they're controlling the audience this way, it's like you are doing the work of the gods, right? And that's why I respect DJs and people that could have that command of an audience. And I saw you do it too online.
Thank
It's like
you.
super impressive. So that kind of music, punk rock, are the things that I try to take to a score, you know. And I've said it before, like Hans Zimmer or John Williams does not make me want to thrash around and dance and up and down and get punched in the face or anything. Like punk rock does, and so does like stuff that is like amazing in EDM. And that influence is important in scoring. You have to know how to propel. You have to know how to drive music to that feels like urgent. That it feels I don't know. Like you have to have music that creates a visceral response in people, where they just want to move or something. You know, and you do that with scenes. Like how do you propel a scene? How do you give it that urgency? You sort of reference that stuff. It's good to have those kind of influences as a composer too, because I can't just like be listening to Star Wars and this kind of stuff. Like you have to understand the value of Kraftwerk and Black Flag to make music that's interesting and compelling.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That Black Flag is one of the first. I'm a metalhead, so before I was into the realm that I exist in today, I was very, you're tracking 5 to 6 elements at a time. You're panning your guitars. You're
Oh yeah.
making, rock singles, metal singles, post-hardcore, punk singles, but it's very true where as I was growing up, I would be at skate park venues and I'd be watching the hardcore shows and you'd be standing on the benches watching all the guys go in the circles. And now that's translated into, what I would consider dubstep or EDM at raves. And that's like the new age, punk show and metal show. And it's at such a larger scale. But I think anyone who is well versed or in this industry in general looks to people like Kraftwerk, like Justice, like Daft Punk as these masters of energy and simplicity.
Yeah.
And they've taken those melodies that just stick in your head. And I think the best artists take from those multiple genres of influence and then they say, what do I want to take here? What do I want to make what's mine and put it all together? And that's, what you've done. And,
You're right. And something about simplicity is important to me too. Like simplicity of melody, of purpose in music is key. Like I don't want to write complex music. I've said this before in an interview. I said like, I aspire to write Three Blind Mice, or like something as simple as like Happy Birthday. Like if you could achieve that, then like you've done something incredible. Like it's so hard to write the simple song, a
hard.
simple melody that people could sing along. It's almost easier to write this complex orchestral thing, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Like if I could just write something simple that'll feel timeless, and people like Justice do it all the time because I hear it's like, oh my god, this is like I feel like I've always known this like since I was a baby. Like I was, but yet it seems so futuristic at the same time. Like it is timeless. But yeah, simplicity is important to me too. Like I try to have strong melodies that kind of cut through, and that sort of is more important than even like the instrumentation or the genre or whatever.
Well, that's what I feel like the general consumer and listener will grasp to the most.
Right,
Because
right.
because I think something that I've talked about with my colleagues before, and I'm sure in this age too, where I went to school for Foley sound. So I was around a bunch of composers all the time. They're like, I'm trying to work on the independent film. I'm trying to get my score slotted this place and this place, and we're doing stuff for free just to get somebody to pick me up.
Mhm.
Is I noticed that, and I still notice it, and I wonder if you see it in your field as well, where a lot of producers write for other producers or composers write for other composers to, whether it's on a scale of difficulty or something to impress somebody else, and they forget about the 99% of the demographic, which is just the listener and just the people who aren't really knowledgeable about your mix down, knowledgeable about all of these different elements and harmonies that you have going on, but forget about that main motif that's driving the whole entire track that serves that melody that I'm going to remember forever in 20 years and hear it and feel like I've known it since I'm 5 years old.
Right, right. Like when I am working on the score and I'm meeting with the directors, I say, don't talk to me about music. Talk to me about feelings. Talk about what we want to feel. Like the least we talk about music, the better off I am. Like this sounds weird, I know, but like I'd rather talk to non-musicians about music. It's kind of like obnoxious talking to musicians about music because it's like it becomes very technical and boring. Like to me, that's irrelevant. Like, what are we supposed to feel when we hear this? Tell me, like, what do you want to feel? And that is like that's ultimately what drives everything I do. I didn't go to music school, so I can't talk to you about theory. I can't explain anything I'm doing. I can't intellectualize anything that I do, and I'm not academic in any way about anything I do. It's all I work is I'm in the business of feelings. That's it.
But we all are, we all are. That's what we're trying to implement. We want you to be able to watch something without the animation, without, the visualizer, and still feel the same thing and still feel those emotions and be able to think about it, reflect about it, relate it to something in our life going on at the current time. I mean, I think most people, when they're sad, may have a sad song they go to. When they're happy, they have a happy song they go to. So we are in the business of feelings. I think sometimes that just gets lost and it gets forgotten about, that it's the most important thing to be able to communicate with our audience. And I know you didn't go to music school, which is insane. And I'm very curious as to how your processes as far as scoring, when it's different when you're in a band, because it's kind of like, I know you were a percussionist, and you can feel the rhythm, you can count 4/4. You did the tap class in college. I was a dancer, I did tap, and that's counting out of 8 instead of counting in 4/4 time. And the music that you're writing is pretty complex, even though you embellish on the simplicities. How do you communicate that to other musicians that are playing underneath you? Are you directing them? Do you have somebody who you go through to write the sheet music for them?
So, like for example, I've written for a 50-piece orchestra,
Yeah.
and what I do, whether it be that or even 6 musicians, I create a mock-up of that entire thing in Logic, which is the software that I use. And
Okay.
this becomes technical, but basically, you have like the first track would be drums, and then you have your bass. In the case of the Cuphead sound, I'd have 3 saxophones: a tenor, alto, baritone, and then a clarinet, and then a trombone, and then a piano track, and one more random thing. Okay, so now I know this is the palette that we use for the Cuphead show. These 8 things. I create everything as a mock-up with sample-based instruments. So you're here. So when I'm building it, I'm using like high-end quality samples that
Like
any
Omnisphere, like Native Instruments, stuff like that.
instrument stuff, and I build it, and I have a good idea of what it's supposed to sound like in my head, and I create this thing that's as close as possible to the real thing. And now that that's done, I have an assistant who takes these things and creates music charts based on that. Okay, so then it's a question of replacing all the fake instruments with the real ones, right? In certain cases, I already played the drums myself, or I did the pianos myself, and those sound great. I want to keep them, but all the horns are going to be replaced. So I have versions of the entire scores that is just like fake version of the entire score before we replace it with real instruments. And I've done the same thing with orchestras. I just build an entire thing. I know, even though you have 50 people on an orchestral stage, it really is only first violin, second violins, violas, cello, upright basses. So it's like, if it's a string orchestra, it's really just 5 voices, right? So in a way, you think of it like, okay, so 2 vocalists, a bass player, the violas, the guitarist. Like if you want to translate it into a rock band situation, you could almost do it like, treat it like that. So I'll build it all in Logic, an entire orchestral thing. I could hear what it's supposed to sound like in my head. And then charts are made again. And now you sit in a giant room, and it's more intimidating, obviously. I remember the first time being in that situation, it was like overwhelming. I cried being in that room, hearing an orchestra play my music. And I've told a funny story before about like trying to pretend like I knew how to read the music. Like I'm actually like going like this, like this, like, oh yeah, as they're playing along, because I almost felt like an idiot for a while, like that I didn't know how to read music. But I had this epiphany where I was like, what am I doing? Like, obviously everyone is here and employed because of me. I don't need to look at this. I was like, I don't need this at all. I'm just going to trust my ears and do what I do. So it was one of those moments of clarity that it took being there in that situation, the imposter syndrome. kind of kicking in, and then you just fight it away, and you're good to go. Does that make sense, by the way, as far as like the process of writing?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that so makes sense to me. Well, I'm thinking that you're writing everything pretty much on the piano roll. You're going through and you're saying, okay, what sounds good? I know what key I'm writing in and I know how to implement that on the piano roll. And then I'm using, I mean, it's what I do. I don't have an orchestra. I don't have anything, but I write things with violins. I write things with cellos, and you're just finding good sound banks, but then you're able to translate that with real-time musicians. I mean, it's honestly, in my mind, the most cost-efficient, quick way to go about something instead of hiring on 100 musicians to sit in a room for 20 hours so you can write a score.
Right. No, I mean, and this is sort of, I have that luxury because Netflix will pay for this, right? But this is not always the case. A lot of times, a studio or an independent project doesn't have the money for that. So we have to work around that. We have to build everything ourselves and maybe use the best possible samples, maybe hire one person to do a violin top line over everything. And it kind of creates the illusion of maybe a real little orchestra or not, but like you make it feel real, and there's tricks to all that. And again, technical, but I leave mistakes in, I leave things not perfectly quantized.
Turn
Especially
off the grid. I tell my students to turn off the grid because you want it to feel real. And if you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, you sound like a robot.
right, right. But yeah, absolutely. But there's times we want the grid, especially if you're doing dance music. Someone like Trent Reznor will work completely on a grid and it still feels emotional and strong, but it's all mechanical too. But there's a time and place for everything. But in the case of something that feels organic like Cuphead, you want it to kind of ebb and flow, and the time could be a little off. You know, I even leave like actual mistakes, like wrong notes, because it just feels like I like the way it feels for there to be errors in music too. You
Well,
know,
that's how it would be if it was played in a live setting. Not everyone's gonna, you have human error. And now we live in such a digital workstation where, you can still have that analog gear, you can still have those real humans, but we have the capability to make it as perfect as possible. And sometimes that's not always the best way to go about it.
well, I'm curious what collaboration is like for you, like when you are working with another person, and like how do you divide up the duties of like how do you decide who is making decisions? If that makes sense.
Oh, this is like an open talk box of like monsters. So like I think everybody exactly what you had said where, you talk about Trent and he has a very specific way of going about things that is very different than you and everyone has their own style, but more than likely the most common way that we go about it in our realm is either you're in the studio with someone, you're choosing whatever DAW is most applicable to both of you. For our industry, the most commonly used DAW is Ableton just because it's super easy, very quick. I love Logic. I started on Logic. I then went to Reason and then went to Ableton. And and so you build the project and the arrangement view. Hopefully you're able to get in the studio with someone, but a lot of times, I'm not on the West Coast. The majority of people I work with are on the West Coast. So you collect all and save and you send it and you freeze your VSTs, you freeze your project files, and then you have to flatten to audio if they don't have it, or you keep that frozen and then you just send it back and forth. And it'll go back and forth, I would say around you have some people who write incredibly quickly. They'll sit down in one session and they'll write the whole dang track. They'll send it to the next person. That person will take away some things, implement their sound. A lot of us are based on sound design. Like kind of how you talk about having your sound as a composer. Danny Elfman has his score, Trent Reznor has his sound. We all kind of distinguish our sound by whether you're maybe a vocalist and composer, your voice might be your sound, or you're working, your predominant VST is Omnisphere, or it's Serum, or it's Phase Plan, or it's Vital. And that's how you start to create your sound banks so that when I'm listening with my eyes closed to the single, I can say, okay, this is where I hear his sound. This is where I hear my sound. And we have to blend those two together. And sometimes it takes longer than not, but that's how we go about it. Do you ever work with other composers and you all kind of do that back and forth in the room?
before I answer that, I'm curious what you do, because do you set ground rules before you start?
I
Like
think that'd be a wonderful way to go about it, but it doesn't always happen that way.
collaborating with someone and they just put in some like something that says is not flowing, and like how do you deal with that just on a political and like personal level with collaborators? Like, I'm just curious.
Honestly, I think the best collaborations come from people who have relationships out of music. I think if we have our team and we have our managers or we have our agents say, "Hey, they're going on tour together. They're doing a festival back to back. How about they create a song together?" That very rarely goes well if they do not have this previous relationship with one another. Now, if you guys are all in this niche lane, you've been on tour with one another, you live in the same state, you have this relationship, it's a lot more less formal of a conversation where you're more open to another person who is in the same line as you. But I want to say that the majority of collaborations that happen within our industry are not by choice. It's by recommendation of an executive. It's by recommendation of a higher up to reach a larger demographic, to have a bigger marketing budget. I myself have, unless I really love the person that I'm working with, there's a lot of artists who don't like collaborating, and it's simply for the reason of it really sucks when you put in a lot of hours and then you get the project back and everything you've done is gone. And that's just part of the process, but it stinks a lot of the time.
What if you are in charge of the collaboration and you're like, hey, I want you to bring in some synth tracks or do some drops here or do whatever. Like, how does that?
So I think in my case, since I am a vocalist, it's really easy when I work with another producer where the majority of when I collaborate is the songwriting process is going in and adding little pieces of ear candy and then really processing my vocals and having them sit well throughout the whole entirety of the track. Versus if I am producing a track from my end and I go to somebody, I'm very clear about my intentions of like, hey, I think that your style of sound design for this drop could do really, really well. Or, hey, I know that you're a violinist as well. You have a violin. I don't. So how about you put your violin in this track and we'll go back and forth. But there are tons of colleagues of mine that, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And usually those collaborations could take up to a year to get to a good plane where if you're on that B tier list of an artist, you have quite a wide range of listeners. So it does matter the kind of tracks that you're releasing. And I've seen more than not instances where there's a lot of butting of heads.
Right. Wow. Okay, that's all fascinating to me. I love.
No, that's amazing. I'm glad you were interested. But yeah, it's again, there's just like an infinite way of possibilities that people go to approach it. But I think off the bat, if people are more in clear with their intentions, the smoother the collaboration process goes.
I have, and to answer your question, I have not collaborated directly where, as a composer, where like I'm co-writing like a melody and then they finish the melody, then I add another part. Like that has not happened yet. I'm not opposed to it, but just the nature of everything I've done has been like I just have to work and get it done, and I'm on schedule, and I got to finish 25 episodes, and there's no time for fun like that. One of the things about being a composer, it kind of we have this romantic notion of artists and what we do so creative and spiritual in a lot of ways, and we're waiting for the messages from above to tell us what the melody is going to be, but we kind of lose that in this business. There is no it's completely I'm going to demystify it in the sense that when something is due Friday at 5 p.m., it's like, and Monday, I can't sit around and wait for the gods to give me the inspiration. I have to start working like instantly. And you have to just trust your instincts and deliver. Like, you can't be like, you know what, I need another week to sit on this and really think about this. It's like, no, we have to get the shit done and turn it in because ultimately, like, there's like millions of dollars at stake because it's a big production and there's 50 people involved. And, you know, uh, so yeah, it's interesting how there is no waiting for your muse or inspiration in being a composer. You just have to hit the ground
Like
running.
there's that like silver lining in it too, though, that I think some people work really well under pressure sometimes, where it brings out that like little umph. But ideally, I think as a composer, as a producer, as an artist, you want to have that like angel come down from the sky and say, "This is the melody that's gonna write your hit single, and it's gonna just blow up, and it's gonna be known by everyone." And that's just not the case the majority of times, because that, I mean, it's the same on our end, where if you're working with a label or you have a record deal, or you're, you know, backing a tour, that album has to be submitted 2 months in advance to get to distro, to get to Spotify pitching and Apple Music and Amazon pitching. So it's very much so similar but different in very many ways. And do you stick on a same schedule, I guess, in the line of, you know, when you have that deadline in 2 weeks or in 5 days, do you say, okay, before I go to bed, before I leave my office today, this has to be done? Or is it more so in a large gap of by Friday, this has to be done?
I have to schedule everything out. Like I have to look at the amount of minutes I have to write, and then figure, okay, I need to be at least 4 minutes in by tonight. So tomorrow I could do another four, and then the final four the third day. And now I'm going to mix on Friday, or I'm going to get the charts made, and then it's going to go to the musicians. They need 3 days to get it back to me. Like everything is totally mapped out on a calendar. Um, there's no, like, I have an assistant, this guy Ben, who's fantastic, and I'm at the point where I just say, Ben, what do I need to do today? He's like, you have to be done with this and this. I'm like, okay, great. And then I just sit down and that's all I do. Like I have I I have to be that disciplined and focused. Otherwise, nothing's gonna happen. Like but that's the thing about us being artists. Like we're not meant to be good with schedules or
No, I'm terrible.
yeah. I hate it. I
Mm,
never school. Like I couldn't turn in my homework on time. I'd be Sunday night finishing everything at 1 in the morning.
yep.
So I'm still that person, but I know that I can't be. I know that I have to get shit done properly. So I put everything on a calendar. I'm looking at it every day. Like this has to be done today. And then I have Ben, who's fantastic, and he's like, "This is what needs to get done. This is what you have to do tomorrow." It's the only way to do it.
It's that mental battle of diligence. And I think a lot of creators are not necessarily academics, and they're not necessarily, I mean, there's a reason why the 9 to 5 did not work out for most of us. And it's just it's this whole journey that has, you know, gotten you to the place where you have this assistant who's like, hey, you need to stay on top of it, da 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 da, da to get everything done so that we can stay in line, so that you can keep prospering as a composer. And so when you started to work with Nickelodeon, because my generation's show was SpongeBob, I would love to know how that went from you working on the first show that you worked with Making Fiends to being a part of the SpongeBob universe.
So SpongeBob is a show that's been around for 20 years, and obviously I was not a part of it from the beginning,
Mhm.
but it's such an iconic and important show. I've always had such reverence for it because it's just all over the world. I think that little yellow sponge, like any kid would recognize what that is, even more so than maybe Mickey Mouse nowadays. I don't know. Um, so I was in physically in the building, and I got to meet a bunch of people on Nickelodeon. One of them was a Mark Ciccarelli, who is the guy that currently is sort of like is co-running the whole show now, um, since Hillenberg passed away. And I was wearing a T-shirt for a band called The Residents. The Residents, who I really love, they're from San Francisco, avant-garde, strange, anonymous art collective. And Mark was like, "Hey, The Residents." I'm like, "Yeah." So we kind of like hit it off because of a band T-shirt, and so we became friends. And one day he's like, "Hey, we have a SpongeBob episode coming up that needs this kind of a weird sequence that sounds like a Raymond Scott song, but we need it to sound like Hawaiian style, blah blah blah." And I'm like, "I'd love to do it." And he said, "Really? Can you do it?" I said, "Yeah." So I got like one shot to do like this one special thing, and they loved it. And from there on, they just kind of kept giving me little assignments, like, "Hey, we got this other thing, we got this other one. Now I'm getting full episodes, right?" And it just became this very slow, gradual thing where they're going to do a spin-off now, the Patrick Star Show.
Yes.
I end up doing the theme song for that and the ending theme and a bunch of stuff for the. So it was like as simple as walking down the halls, having a band T-shirt on, and two people being like, "Hey, yes, I like that. You like that. Let's be friends." You know, and then from there, it led to me doing music now for all three of the SpongeBob universe shows. It's nuts, right? It's kind of like it seems like very simple, but also like almost impossible to recreate that scenario where you just happen to be in that hallway because you're meeting with someone else and you pass each other. There's so much
Time
chance,
and place, so much chance.
right? It's almost like our talent is not enough. It's where we are, it's who we meet, it's how nice we are. Also, like, do we get along with people? Like, 'cause he could have pointed out my shirt and I could have been like, yeah, and just walked away. But it's kind of like you're kind, you smile, you kind of like make friends, and stuff happens. It's really important that we be personable and kind and helpful to each other. Uh, it makes all the difference, and it's paid off for me more than any so-called talent that I have.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
you know,
I mean, it's so much of I remember being in school and we would have people in, master classes come in. And so much of it was, you could be the most talented person in the room, but if you're not kind and you don't have the diligence to work hard, it's never going to work. And I think so much of that is, you have to put in your time, you have to put in your hours, you have to make your mistakes and learn from them, but all the while so much of it is just that consistency to keep pushing, because if you never worked on Making Fiends, you never would have been in that hallway, and then the shirt and the conversation, and one leads to another, and reflecting on it must just be pretty surreal looking back at the journey of your career.
yeah, and it's only happening now that I'm doing all these interviews because it's like I've never stopped to think about it that much. I'm always like trying to work on my career quite literally. Like I never you don't stop to realize that you've done all this stuff until someone says it to you. I'm always like, gosh, what am I going to do next? Am I going to get my next job? I live with that every day because I think I know how hard it is to get into this business. Like, I grew up with a bunch of musicians. We were all the same. We're all playing in bands. We were all in the same garage playing punk rock stuff. And as talented as all my friends were, they weren't able to make a living in music. I was the only one. And I live with almost like this survivor's guilt. Like I almost am embarrassed to share it with my friends sometimes, like because I feel like they all deserve it too. Like everyone was just as talented and wanted to do this just as much, but the odds are against us all. Like the system is not set up for our success. We have to really do really weird stuff sometimes to make it happen. Like you have to. I mean, I had to get this loan that was like borderline illegal so I could get music equipment at one point. I like had when I worked at UCLA, Apple had a loan program back then for students where like you get an Apple loan, and you could buy computer equipment with it. So I signed up for like a fake class. They had a like UCLA extensions program, which is essentially like night school, adult school. So I signed up for this class on like how to quit smoking, like any random thing. It was only like a $35 class, but it gave me a receipt that said I was technically enrolled at UCLA, even though I was not. And I used that to qualify for a $10,000 loan from Apple. And I, I got the money and I like cashed it and I went to Guitar Center and I got speakers. Like I didn't even use it for Apple stuff. It was nuts. And like I paid it back. I didn't like, defraud.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But you have to do shady shit sometimes to achieve this because it's not easy. Like it's the path is not straight. Like no matter how much schooling you do or whatever, it's the odds are going to be against you. It's really hard. And I've had friends tell me like, "Hey, come talk at my school or whatever." And I feel like, man, do you want me to be honest, or do you want me to like pretend like go for your follow your dreams, kids? Because I do believe that, but also it's a fucking hard road. And to this day, again, I still don't know. Like, can it all end tomorrow? Maybe. That's why I'm like so grateful. I have like pure gratitude for everything I have right now, every show is like, thank God. I feel like I got my foot wedged in the door of this industry, and I'm just going to hold on for dear life to this opportunity and not let the door close on me because I know how easy it is for it to go away. And I think, yeah, you have to maintain that level of gratitude for this entire thing when you have it, you know?
Oh, I mean, 100%. We see it in our industry all the time where you'll see somebody on this massive touring circuit. You'll see somebody have this headlining tour, and 2 years go by, and you're like, where did they go? You just don't know where they went. And it's 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 hard. And you want to be optimistic. You have to be positive because the only way that you can deal with all of the no's and all the failure that comes is to keep that optimism and keep looking down to the long term, end goal. But I think so much of it as well as being open to things that you didn't necessarily were going to be part of your journey, and take those little things that come because you never know what door they're going to open and you never know who you're going to meet through the other side of that. And I think the biggest thing, especially in live music where we don't make a lot of money off of touring, and that's the majority of our income as an artist, where it doesn't matter if you're touring with no equipment but a USB and an in-ear monitor system. You're still, let's say you're making $1,000, $2,000 off of a booking fee. You have your hotels, you have your flights, you have your Ubers, your Lyfts. And with COVID, it's made everything substantially harder because so many of these studios have closed. So many of these venues have closed. But you just have to be innovative. And I think as long as you're doing something in the field of audio, you should consider yourself as succeeding. And especially, as we are a little bit younger, it's just amazing to speak to someone like yourself who is, 2 decades down the road where you've been in the same position as all of us. And you've had that day job, and you've had that imposter syndrome, and you've had those moments where you don't know if you're going to make it, and you've seen most of your colleagues and your friends not make it. And that's hard. That's a very hard conversation to have, especially when you feel like everything's going right, but you have these people who you care about and you love, and you're like, ah, damn, it should be going right for them too.
Totally. I have a question for you too, because
Absolutely.
how important I see you perform live on YouTube.
Yes. Yeah.
Watching the audience is so phenomenal, like taking command of that kind of audience and everyone just sort of moving to what you're dictating with your music is beautiful and amazing. I'm wondering how important that is to you versus like being a producer, being like a composer. Like, do you see live performance as like the end game, like the most important thing, that like the thing that gives you the most fulfillment, or would you rather be doing music for the background that you'll never get to feel any sort of response from?
I think, and I speak to my significant other all the time, is when I play a
Mhm.
festival, or I play a sold out show, and you've got 1,000 people in a venue, 5,000 people in a venue, or you've got 50,000 people in front of you at a festival. There is no substance, no feeling that will make you feel that way. And you spoke about that when you were performing in a band. It doesn't matter if there's 10 people in a room or if there's 50,000, having that connection with other living, breathing humans and having the power. It's kind of like you have this magic talking stick where if you tell them to move, they're going to move. And if you tell them to jump, they're going to jump. And it's this really awesome connection that you feel with one another that is undescribably the best feeling in the whole world.
Mhm.
However, I know that my goals and my aspirations are not always, while that gives me the most satisfaction, my goals and my aspirations for a long term career are different. Where long term, before I kind of got into this industry, I wanted to do exactly what you're doing. And I don't think that it's off the table as far as we work in these digital stations now, and there's so many of us who do jingles or scoring or little bits of songwriting for little scenes, or getting picked up or getting split deals or publishing deals or working in video games. But it's more so that I think a lot of people who are not necessarily in it for the music in our scene, they drive that social media following, that feeling on stage, because that's all that they want. Where the more people who I speak to who are driven by, I would say, the music, they just want to create. And they don't care if it's underneath their name. They don't care if it's for another project like Ghost Production. They don't care if it's doing a split deal working for a video game. They just want to make music, because everything that I write for Lizzy Jane may not be perfect for a rave. It may not be perfect for that kind of environment. So the people and my colleagues who are like me, or who are 5 levels above me, we find these other ways to monetize that music or give that music to someone else that makes us feel artistically fulfilled. Because a lot of times it's like we have to say, okay, well, we're going to do 10 songs for this label, and we're going to make a really crazy drop or a really crazy banger of a song for a rave. And
Yeah.
then as time goes by in your career, it doesn't necessarily make you feel artistically fulfilled anymore. And because
Mhm.
it feels like a job, and you have to make the same type of music in the same 5 keys at the same BPM over and over and over again. And so that's where I see these people 5, 10, 15 years into their career, they start doing these other things. And a lot of times they end up on your side of the industry, where they end up composing, they end up working underneath someone like yourself and start building in that lane, because it is very different, but it's also like working in the digital age. If you have those VSTs, if you have that opportunity to hire those few musicians and you're knowledgeable, I have to say that, like, writing electronic music is I would have never been able to simplify my music and write it elegantly and work on different melodies and work in different time signatures if I never push myself to write 100 to 300 track songs, and find that complexity to be able to step back and say, okay, well, now I kind of want to write some pop music that's going to be 20 tracks. Now I want to do some work for an alternative rock band, indie band, and I'm going to track them and do the engineering there. And it's much more simple to me, and it gets that little bug going of creativity that's a little bit different than saying, okay, the label wants something with this singer, and it's going to be on this, and it's going to be on this release schedule, and it's going to be on this Spotify playlist. Make something that fits that, because then that's your job, and then you have to fill the other side where you want that artistic freedom. So it's fine. It's like a balancing act. I don't know if that made sense to you, but hopefully gave a little bit of a back end.
Okay, more specifically, let's say you're working on a TV project and
Mhm.
you have this piece of music that you wrote and they love it. And then in your mind, you wrote this thing and you love at 1 minute and 30 seconds, there's this fantastic drop. And that's like your favorite thing. And they're like, this is all great, but we want to cut it right at 1 minute and 29 seconds. And this is now it's perfect. Like, could you emotionally, are you like, could you handle that kind of thing? Like, would you be okay with that in a production?
I think personally answering, yes. A lot of my colleagues, absolutely not. And but I think it's a mindset of looking at everything differently. Because, like, I'll write jingles for some
Yeah,
company that's writing birthday songs for their 5-year-old that wants the song about a dog. So
right, right.
it's like it depends on each job. Now, do I want somebody coming into anything that I would write under the Lizzy Jane umbrella and saying, hey, like, we hate this? I am at the point where I go, okay, well, I wrote it, so I'm going to take it to somebody who likes it, because I have this artistic integrity in it, and that give and take, and I'm willing to wiggle, but I'm not willing to do something that is not my vision and my creation. And I think you had spoke about having people that really love what you're doing or they really hate it. And I think the most successful people in our industry, as far as producers go, are followings that really love them, or there's people who really hate them. Because if you try and please everyone, you're going to stay at this stagnant level where you lose what you want to do, and you end up trying to please every label and every person in the crowd, and it's just not possible, and you go crazy that way.
You totally nailed it. So true.
It's it's such a mental game. And I talk to so many people, whether they're producers or composers or people writing for video games, and I think a lot of the time we miss out on the mental conversation because a lot of what we do has to be in that mental state to create, but then deal with the deadlines and deal with the rejection and deal with an executive coming in and saying, the majority of where you spent that time on the song, we don't like it. It's done. It's done. We're just going to take this. And you have to be okay with it sometimes, or you have to make the decision to say, no, I'm standing my ground. I'm going elsewhere.
There's a thing that I've had to develop, a special muscle where you have to put a lot of care into what you do. I put a lot of care into what I write, but it's also at the same time not precious to me. I could like throw it in the fire at any second. And that's like a weird new mindset that I've developed as a composer because I have no choice. I could work on a minute of music all day and then it could be the greatest thing I've ever done. And then they could just cut it out in one heartbeat. And this is going on daily over and over because I write, 30 cues for an episode and then I'm doing 50 episodes. So you have to be prepared for this kind of rejection over and over. And you have to put yourself in a mindset where you have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
You can't stop and cry about losing this track or losing the best part of your song or the melody. Ultimately, and the way you do that, the thing that you do in your brain is realizing that you're in the service of something bigger. This is not about our music. We are ultimately trying to drive a story, tell the story of Cuphead and Mugman or whatever character is that you're working with, whatever movie. That is really what we're doing. And we're at the service of the director and the producers and what their vision is. Like we're kind of like the Robin to their Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So if you keep that in mind, you're able to do it and sort of live with it a little better and know that, you know what, I get my own I have my own outlet too outside of this. I can make my own music, put out my own records when I find time.
Right. Oh, absolutely. But I think that's what's so intriguing and cool about what you do is that there is this bigger purpose and you are playing a part in the spinning wheel that has to continue to move forward. And I think that is where that wiggle room of like, yes, everything I just put into this is amazing. And I finally got it to a point where I'm self-satisfied with it, but it's not just about me. It's about the bigger picture. And that's what I wish in our industry we had a bit more of. And that's why I do like collaborating with the right people because everything's better when you have more minds in the room. That's how I feel. I mean, I know artistic people and especially musicians, that comes with the butting of heads and that comes with the arguments because everybody thinks that they're right 100% of the time. However, you get these things and these perspectives that you would have never heard. Or when I show my music to somebody who isn't a musician and they say, wow, I really like that part. And to me, I'm like, oh, that was a throwaway. I didn't even think that was important, but you loved it. And I take that away and I do that. But on our side, we're really expected to do the majority of our work within these four walls. Now we may have a master engineer, but as far as the production and the processing and all of the instrumentation, it's all done with us right here. And I think that in more marketable genres of music or in your lane of composition, you do get these people in these rooms where you've got someone who's better than you in this alley and you've got someone who's better than you here. Me, I'm like okay at like everything. Like I'm like I can do the piano, I can do the bass, I can do the drums on my Ableton and use the piano roll and I can sing and I can process my own vocals and I can mix and master everything. But I can't come to you and say like, yeah, this is me. I'm a vocal engineer. I can make your vocals sound like Lady Gaga and that's what you're going to pay me a lot of money for. But that's how people in our lane rise to the occasion is because you have to be good at everything. And, maybe somewhere in this journey, I will come along with something and say, this is what I'm really good at. And this is what I need to continue to pursue. But I think there's something cool about being knowledgeable about everything, but being able to recognize when someone is better than you and taking that person and saying, hey, I want you on my team. And what you do, you're good at emoting feelings and writing in the business of feelings and writing that score that goes along with the climax and the dynamic energy of each scene and then saying, okay, well, you guys take it from here because I'm not going to go shred on the saxophone. And this is your part to come in and make this come to life.
You're totally right. We, as artists, it's important that we surround ourselves with people that are better than us always. Like you have to have very little ego, contrary to my name. You
Yeah.
have to, in order to be successful, you have to recognize other people's talents and abilities and what they could bring to your projects and be humble, and like I said earlier, in my case, not be too precious about what I'm doing. It's not gold. It's fine. it's still my music. I could keep it for something else one day.
Do you repurpose it? If they throw it out, do you save it? Or are you the type of person that it's like, hey, I need to let this go so I don't keep coming back to it?
In the case of Cuphead, it kind of just goes away and it's still somewhere, but I haven't repurposed it. I just auditioned for a show and I didn't get the job, but I loved what I wrote so much that I'm turning it into songs for me. So that's kind of cool. Like I realized at the end, like, hey, you know what? It was kind of a blessing that I didn't get this job because like this is going to be the first track on my solo album if I ever get to this one day. But yeah, it's like it's still our music, even if whatever, regardless of what inspired it, it's still from us.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on today. I enjoy these conversations so much because I very often am speaking to people within my industry, obviously, and people around my same kind of bracket of experience. And you are someone that the majority of people who listen to this podcast, they are aspiring producers, they are aspiring music industry personnel. And we all have this conversation where we have a very strict career shelf life that is not long in being a DJ, in being a producer, in electronic dance music. You get those outliers like Daft Punk. You get those outliers like Justice. But in the day and age in which we exist in, there's so many of us, and it really takes something extraordinary to have your career surpass 35 years old, 36 years old, where you're touring 24/7, 10 months out of the year. And then you go and write an album and then you come back to support the album. And so many of us have these discussions where it's like, where's our footing going to plant what's next so we don't get to that point and turn around and say, well, shit, we didn't make a lot of money off of touring, even though we loved it and we lived for the live performance aspect, but we still want to stay in music. And I think even though it's not, we're not setting our grounds in the arena, I would say, of composition, we do have the capabilities to go about this other alleyway of writing music and doing well at it and continuing to just be in music in general instead of having to say, okay, this chapter of our life is over. We go elsewhere now.
What is next for you? Is that something you want to pursue, like composition for like TV?
I would say composition for video games is huge for me. And I love Foley sound. Foley sound is what I would be doing if I was not doing what I'm doing now. And that is something that really, really intrigues me as far as going out in the field, grabbing sounds, coming in. And now it's like, I feel like I've taken enough where I have my Pro Tools, I have my Ableton, I have my Logic where I can do the scoring correctly because you can't do that in Ableton. And it's like wherever the wind takes me is what I do. And I teach my students now and I do what I need to do to continue supporting my project. But I do feel like the time will come where I do get to make an executive decision as far as, hey, where are you going to start to place those little markers? Because I just write more and more music that's not electronic and it just doesn't fit my project. It doesn't fit this genre that I exist in as a career right now, but I never throw it away. It's always in a project in an external hard drive somewhere.
Right. I love that. It's so funny because it's like we always want what we don't have. Like I want to do what you're doing. I'd love to perform again. Part of my goal is to try to do something like on stage again one day. And hopefully it'll happen as soon as things slow down a little bit.
Well, I look at Danny Elfman and I remember I almost flew out to California to see his playthroughs of The Nightmare Before Christmas with Billie Eilish and such. And I look at that and I'm like, that's something you could totally do. Or you could grab a drum set and play behind an orchestra. And I think it's cool because there's such a large umbrella. There's so many no's. There's so many people who don't make it, but I feel like if you just keep pushing, you may
Yeah,
not be financially fulfilled, but at least you can be happy and do what you love.
right. Well said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I before you go, again, thank you so much for your time. I want to know if there's like a dream franchise that you have always wanted to work on or be a part of. Do you have those little things in the back of your mind, or do you just take it day by day, job offer by job offer, or those possibilities to go and apply to work behind a score?
There is one.
Okay.
Animal Crossing, the video game. I would love if that ever became a series. I would love to work on that.
Really?
And
Animal Crossing. Oh my gosh. Okay.
that is a game that sort of helped me through the whole pandemic. I got my Switch. I don't know if you got into it at all, but I became obsessed. It
I
was so
tried. I tried.
it's so cute and charming and simple and a wonderful escape because it's like you just planting flowers and watering apple trees. It really is like perfectly wholesome and it's so beautiful and simple. I'm not a gamer, but that sort of became like my entryway into playing games, and I loved it so much. And I thought, if they ever turn this into something beyond this, I would love to be involved. That would be
That's
like,
amazing.
what about you?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm I'm a DC freak.
Yeah,
I'm obsessed with the DC universe. I
yeah,
would I would love, well, for the first time ever, I do have a bit of classical training, nothing insane. My violin teacher refused to teach me when I was 9 years old. So there's that back end of it, and then I started writing hardcore music. So it went from one end to the other very very quickly.
yeah.
However, in the new age of digital workstations, like I feel like for the first time, it's very possible for me to pursue scoring in a certain manner in the future. And I even do that now with, like, I have the monitor behind my main laptop at my studio, and I'll do vaporwave, or I'll watch music without the sound on. And I
Right.
think even though I'm not time coding like you could be sometimes as you're going, and you have to write those split scenes and the climax scenes and the fight scenes and have everything exactly where it needs to be on the exact point, like Foley sound would be for a video game and such. It's more so writing these euphoric environments and atmospheres is where I'm at, of bringing to life these scenes and then just building on it when I have free time.
The instinct is already there as a performer. When you are taking command of an audience, you are like completely in tune with what these bodies are doing. Like if there's a lull, like, okay, it's time to change the beat here or add something or go in a different direction. Like you are scoring this sea of 10,000 people when you do a live show. So your instincts are already doing this, you know?
Which I appreciate. And I mean, you're so right. I talk about it with fellow DJs, fellow producers, is reading a crowd is very, very important. And
That's
being able, you
what
know,
we do.
yeah,
We, we
it's a
read
huge
the
thing.
moment, the scenes, and we, do what the scene is calling for at that specific moment. We're in the same business. So
No, it gives me hope and promise through this conversation where, it's not this unobtainable thing. And I think exactly what you said about earlier. You're always thinking to what's next, and you very rarely get to take a step back and say, wow, I'm here. And I think some of the best moments in my career, and I feel like maybe you'll feel the same way, at the time that it was happening, you weren't taking that step back and saying, wow, like, wow, this is incredible. This is what I talked about when I was 20 years old. This is what I talked about when I was 15, whatever. And and when you reflect in these conversations, which is why I love doing these podcasts, even though this was kind of a COVID baby child when we had no shows and no touring, it's really cool to see people like yourself and other artists who I look up to have these moments where it's like, wow, this is actually a pretty wild journey I've been on.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad you reached out to me and made time to do this because it takes stuff like this for me to really stop and appreciate the stuff that I've been lucky enough to do. So thank you to you for pointing
Yes,
it back.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's all a privilege to all of us that we've worked really hard, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of failure, but it is a privilege to do what we do because not a lot of people get to do it or make a living off of it.
Right.
But on that note, I want to thank you for your time. Cuphead is out now, renewed for another 2 seasons. I'll have to maybe one time when I'm in LA we can do one in person, and I would love to talk to you about another 1,000 things I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, what do
Um,
you, and I can show you the studio.
yes, no, it looks so interesting behind you. I feel like I'm in a Dr. Seuss house almost. I love it, like a dark Dr. Seuss. But anyways, Ego, thank you so much for your time. I will hopefully talk to you soon, and I'm wishing you all the best of luck, and I can't wait for the next season.
Thank you so much again.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so
Take care.
much. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. I will talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.